Hi everyone. Been hearing a lot about Oprah and how they're agreeing with banning books and stuff about the Holocaust. That's like freaking trying to freaking silence people's freedom of speech for one. Two, trying to make people stupid of what happened in in our history. I mean, Mao's and, and stuff. If this Karen who started all this with the banning of the book, if she really was going to ban everything dealing with the Holocaust, this is the book that they should be banning. But she isn't going after all books. This book right here, I've read in high school. This book is such a great book. It depicts everything about the Holocaust. This guy, it says here, Wiesel has taken his own anguish and imaginatively metamorphosized it into art. That was Kurt Leverett from Saturday Review. It says here, Night is one of the masterpieces of the Holocaust literature. First published in 1958. So this is about over 60 years old. Okay? It is the autobiographical account of an adolescent boy and his father in Auschwitz. Elie Wiesel writes of their battle for survival and of his battle with God for a way to understand the wanton cruelty he witnessed each day. In the short novel Dawn, 1960, a young man who has survived World War II, settled in Palestine, joins a Jewish underground movement and is commanded to execute a British officer who has been taken hostage. In Day, previously titled The Accident, 1961, Wiesel questions Wiesel, whatever, the limit of conscience. Can Holocaust survivors forge a new life despite their memories? The memoir and two novels that compose Wiesel's trilogy offers insight on mankind's attraction to violence and on the temptation of self-destruction. This guy is the author of more than 40 acclaimed works, has been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, United States of America Congressional Gold Medal, the rank of Grand Croix, or whatever, I don't know how to pronounce that, in the French Legion of Honor, and in 1986, the Nobel Peace Prize. Called The Night Trilogy, The Night, Day, The Dawn. The Dawn Day, whatever. And I bet you 100% Whoopi Goldberg has not read this book. None of these Karens read the books that they're banning. You only read a couple pages and they think it's too much for other parents to do. My word to Karens out there who think they can butt in and be nosy and tell other parents what to do. You haven't, one, read the entire book to see how good it is to read a book about historical facts. And two, stop parenting my child. If I don't want my kid to read it, I'll do I'll tell the kid, do not read it. Okay? It's not up to you to tell me what to do with my child. Okay? These Karens need to stop thinking that they know better for everyone around. If it's not good for you, then that's fine. But don't tell me what to do how to parent my child. Tell my kid not what to read. I had my kid read this back to back because I wanted her to know real history. Now I ain't taking away freedom of opinion and everything from these people who write about their experience. And it says here is translated from the French by Marion Wiesel. Wiesel. The night. In memory of my parents and of my little sister, Cispira. This new translation in memory of my grandparents, Abda, Sarah, and Nachman, who also vanished into that night. I hope Whoopi reads this book. She needs to read this book in the two weeks that she's been suspended, because this will open up her eyes, because this is from a survivor's point of view. If my lifetime I was to write only one book, this would be the one. Just as the past lingers in the present, all my writings after night, including those that deal with biblical, Talmudic, or Hasidic themes, profoundly bear its stamp, and cannot be understood if not read this very first of my works. Why did I write it? Did I write it so it's not to go mad, or on the contrary, to go mad in order to understand the nature of madness, the immense, terrifying madness that had erupted in history and in conscience of mankind? Was it to leave behind a legacy of words, of memories, to help prevent history from repeating itself? Or is it simply to preserve a record of the ordeal I endured as an adolescent, at an age when one's knowledge of death and evil should be limited to what one discovers in literature? There are those who tell me what I survived in order to write this text. I am not convinced. I don't know how I survived. I was weak, rather shy, and I did nothing to save myself. A miracle? Certainly not. If heaven could or would perform a miracle for me, why not the others more deserving than myself? It was nothing more than chance. However, having survived, I needed to give some meaning to my survival. Was it to protect that meaning that I set to paper an experience in which nothing made any sense? In retrospect, I must confess that I do not know, or no longer know, what I wanted to achieve with my words. I only know that without this testimony, my life as a writer, or my life, period, would not have become what it is, that of a witness who believes he has moral obligation to try to prevent the enemy from enjoying one last victory by allowing his climax to be erased from human memory. For today, thanks to recently discovered documents, the evidence shows that in the early days of their ascension to power, the Nazis in Germany set out to build a society in which there simply would be no room for Jews. Inward, toward the end of their reign, their goal changed. They decided to leave behind a world in ruins in which Jews would seem never to have existed. That is why everywhere in Russia, in the Ukraine, and in Lithuania, the Isurus happened carried out the final solution by turning their machine guns on more than 1 million Jews, men, women, and children, and throwing them into huge mass graves, dug just moments before by the victims themselves. Special units would then disinter the corpses and burn them. Thus, for the first time in history, Jews were not only killed twice but denied burial in a cemetery. It is obvious that the war which Hitler and his accomplices waged was a war not only against Jewish men, women, and children, but also against Jewish religion, Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, therefore Jewish memory. Convinced that this period in history would be judged one day, I knew that I must bear witness. I also knew that while I had many things to say, I did not believe the words to I did not have the words to say them. Painfully aware of my limitations, I watched helplessly as language became an obstacle. It became clear that it would be necessary to invent a new language, but was one too relatable and transform words betrayed and perverted by the enemy. Hunger, thirst, fear, transport, selection, fire, chimney. These words all have intrinsic meaning, but those times they meant something else. Writing in my mother's tongue, at the point close to extinction, I paused at every sentence and start over and over again. I wouldn't conjure up other verbs, another image, other silent cries. It would still was not right. But what exactly was it? It was something elusive, darkly shrouded by fear of being usurped, profaned. All the dictionary had to offer seemed meager, pale, and lifeless. Was there a way to describe the last journey in sealed cat- cattle cars? The last voyage towards the unknown? Or the discovery of a dismantled and glacial universe where to the inhuman was human, where disciplined and educated men in uniforms came to kill, and innocent children and weary old men came to dine, or the countless separations on a single fiery night, the tearing apart of entire families, entire communities, or incredibly the vanishing of a beautiful, well behaved little Jewish girl with golden hair and a sad smile, murdered with her mother the very night of their arrival. How was one to speak of them without trembling and a heart broken for all eternity? Deep down, the witness knew then, as he does now, that his testimony would not be received. After all, it deals with an event that sprang from the darkest zone of man. Only those who experience Auschwitz know what it was. Others will never know, but would they at least understand? Could men and women who consider it normal to assist the weak to heal the sick, to protect small children, and to respect the wisdom of their elders. Understand what happened there. Would they be able to comprehend how, within that cursed universe, the masters tortured the weak, massacred the children, the sick, and the old? Yet, having lived through the experience, one could not keep silent no matter how difficult, if not impossible, it was to speak. And I persevered, and trusted the silence that envelops and transcends words, knowing all the while that any of the fields of ashes of Bergman carries. Excuse my, I can't really see. More ways than all the testimonies about Bergman. For despite all of my attempts to articulate the unspeakable, it is still not right. Is that why my manuscript, written in Yiddish as and the world remained silent, and translated first into French, when and then into English, was rejected by every major publisher, French and American, despite the tireless efforts of the great Catholic French writer and Nobel literate Francis Marceau. After months and months of personal visits, letters, and telephone calls, he finally succeeded in getting it into print. Though I made numerous cuts, the original Yiddish version still was long. Jerome Linden, the legendary head of the small but prodigious educations of the Minute, edited and further cut the French version. I accepted his decision because I worried that some things might be superfluous. Substance alone mattered. I was more afraid of having said too much than too little. Example, in the Yiddish version, the narrative opens with these cynical musings. In the beginning there was faith, which is childish trust, which in vain, and illusion, which is dangerous. We believed in God, trusted in man, and lived with the illusion that everyone has been entrusted with a sacred spark from the Shekinah flame that every one of us carries in his eyes and his soul, a reflection of God's image. That was the source, if not the cause, of all ordeals. Other passages from the original Yiddish text had more on the death of my father and on the liberation. Why not include those in this new translation? Too personal, too private, perhaps. They need to remain between the lines, and yet I remember the night, the most horrendous of my life. Eliezer, my son, come here. I want to tell you something. Only to you. Come, don't leave me alone, Eliezer. I heard the voice grasping the meaning of his words and the tragic dimension of the movement, yet I did not move. It had been his last wish to have me next to him in his agony. At that, at the moment when his soul was tearing itself from his lacerated body, yet I did not let him have his wish. I was afraid of the blows, That was why I remained deaf to his cries. Instead of sacrificing my miserable life, rushing to his side, taking his hand, reassuring him, showing him that he was not abandoned, that I was near him, that I felt his sorrow. Instead of all that, I remained flat on my back, asking God to make my father stop calling my name, to make him stop crying, so afraid I was to incur the wrath of the SS. In fact, my father was no longer conscious. Yet his plaintive, harrowing voice went on piercing the violence and calling me nobody but me. Let's see here. Okay. Well, the SS has flown into a rage and was striking my father on the head. Be quiet, old man, be quiet. My father no longer felt the club blows. I did, and I did not react. I let the SS beat my father. I left him alone in the clutches of death. Clutches of death. Worse, I was angry with him for having been noisy, for having cried, for provoking the wrath of the SS. Eleazar, Eleazar, come, don't leave me alone. His voice had reached me from so far away, from so close, but I had not moved. I shall never forgive myself, nor shall I ever forgive the world for having pushed me against the wall, for having turned me into a stranger, for having augmented in me the baseness among primitive instincts. His last words had been my name, a summons. I had not responded. In the Yiddish version, the narrative does not end with the image in the mirror, but with a gloomy meditation on the present. And now, scarcely 10 years after Buchenwald, I realized that the world forgets quickly. Today's Germany is a sovereign state. The German army had been resuscitated, resuscitated, resuscitated. Ulysses Kuch, the numerous sadistic monster of Bushwild, was allowed to have children and live happily ever after. War criminals stroll through the streets of Hamburg and Munich. The past seems to have been erased, relegated to oblivion. Today there are anti-Semitics in Germany, France, and even the United States who tell the world that the story, quote unquote story, of 6 million assassinated Jews is nothing but a hoax. And many people, not knowing any better, may well believe them. If not today, then tomorrow or the day after. I am not so naive to believe that this slim volume will change the course of history or shake the conscience of the world. Books no longer have the power they once did. Those who keep silent yesterday will remain silent tomorrow. The reader would be entitled to ask, why this translation since the carrier one had been around for 45 years? If it is not faithful nor not good enough, Why did I wait so long to replace it with the better and closer to the original? In response, I would say only that back then I was an unknown writer who was just getting started. My English was far from good. When my British publisher told me that he had found a translator, I was pleased. I later read the translation and it seemed all right. I never reread it. Since then, many of my other works have been translated by Marion, my wife, who knows my voice and knows and how to transmit it better than anyone else. I am fortunate when Ferrer, Strauss, and Behu, well, I don't know how to pronounce that, asked her to prepare a new translation. She accepted. I am convinced that the readers will appreciate her work. In fact, as a result of her righteous editing, I was able to correct and revise a number of important details. And so, I reread this text written so long ago. I am glad that I did not wait any longer, and yet I will still wonder, have I used the right words? I spoke of my first night over there, the discovery of the reality inside the barbed wire, the writings of a quote unquote veteran inmate, counseling my father and myself to lie about our ages. My father was to make himself younger and I older. The selection, the march towards the chimneys looming in the distance under an indifferent sky, the infants thrown into the fiery ditches. I did not say that they were alive, but they was what I thought. But then I convinced myself, no, they were dead. Otherwise, I surely would have lost my mind. Yet fellow inmates also saw them. They were alive. They were thrown into the flames. Historians, among them Telford Taylor, confirmed it. And yet, somehow I did not lose my mind. Before concluding this introduction, I believe it is important to emphasize how strongly I feel that books, just like people, have a destiny. Some invite sorrow, others joy, some both. Either I describe the difficulties encountered by Knight before its publication in French 47 years ago. Despite overwhelmingly favorable reviews, this book sold poorly. The subject was considered morbid and interested no one. If a rabbi happened to mention the book in his sermon, there was always people ready to complain that it was senseless and to burden our children with the tragedies of the Jewish past. Since then, much has changed. Night has been received in ways that I never expected. Today, students in high schools and colleges in the United States and elsewhere read it as a part of their curriculum. How to explain this phenomenon? First of all, there has been a powerful change in the public's attitude. In the 50s and 60s, adults born before or during World War II showed a careless and patronizing indifference towards what is inaccurately called the Holocaust. That is no longer true. Back then, few publishers had the courage to publish books on that subject. Today, such works were on most book lists. The same is true in academia. Back then, few schools offer courses in that subject. Today, many do. And strangely, those courses are particularly popular. The topic of Auschwitz had become part of mainstream culture. There are films, plays, novels, international conferences, exhibitions, annual ceremonies with the participation of the nation's officialdom. That most striking example is that of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., which I went to see. Very powerful. You should go see it. Go to it. It's amazing. It has received more than 25 million visitors since its inauguration in '93. This may be because the public knows the number of survivors is daily. That is shrinking daily. Shrinking daily. And it's fascinated by the idea of sharing memories that will soon be lost. For in the end, it is all about memory, its sources and its magnitude, and of course its consequences. For the survivor who chooses to testify, it is clear his duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would be not only dangerous but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. Sometimes I am asked if I know the response to Auschwitz. I answer not only to do I not know it, but that I don't even know if its tragedy of this magnitude has a response. What I do know is that there is a response in responsibility. When we speak of this era of evil and darkness so close and yet so distant, responsibility is the key word. The witness has forced himself to testify. For the youth of today, for the children who will be born tomorrow, he does not want his past to become their future. Elie Wiesel. And that's just a tinge of what's in this book. Tinge of what's in this book. And you can hear the sadness in his words in that forward. The experience that he had with the Holocaust. Seriously, quickly read this book. This will open up your eyes. Open up every Karen's eyes of what they are doing. What cancel culture is doing. Because all you're going to do is, with canceling these books like this, you're not only trying to make the history people to forget history, but it will also repeat history. We need to remember what happened and not let it happen again. Because Hitler was a very evil man. Very evil man. That's why he was known as one of the Antichrists. He was that evil. And I will read chapter 1 later. That was just the forward.